Welcome back to Let's Talk About Labor, where we explore the real world challenges and solutions related to farm labor across U.S. agriculture. We are thankful once again for the support of our partner organizations, including the Southern Risk Management Education Center, GAP Connections, the USDA's Specialty Crop Research Initiative, the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and the University of Florida Farm Labor Supervisor Certification Program. In this episode, we'll talk about how the new methodology for determining the adverse effect wage rate is impacting the wages farmers are actually paying and their overall labor cost. Also, we'll discuss a recent proposal to modify certain aspects of the H-2A program, the Securing Agriculture's Workforce Act of 2026. It is important to acknowledge that this act is just a proposal and it has not been passed by Congress and is not currently law. Everything we discuss today is based on what the proposal would do if it were eventually enacted. As with any bill, it could be amended, delayed, or fail to pass altogether. My name is Margarita Velandia, and I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee. Today, we are excited to welcome once again our guest, Linda Pryor, co-owner of Hilltop Farm WNC LLC. Aside from farming, she is also an advocate for agriculture. She is involved in various organizations and boards at the county, state, and national levels. She is a member of the American Farm Bureau Federation Agricultural Labor Issues Advisory Committee. Thank you for joining us again today, Linda.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get to talk about this. It's exciting.
All right, Linda, let's talk first about this, the new methodology to determine the adverse effect wage rate. So, for our listeners, this methodology was well received by farmers as it alleviated concerns about rising labor costs that were increasing at a pace that was difficult to sustain over time. I recently actually checked the H-2A disclosure data for the second quarter of the fiscal year 2026 in Tennessee and noticed that wage offers to workers subject to temporary labor certification range anywhere from $10.84, which is the lower end, all the way up to $20.63. So, why don't you talk to us about how your operation has managed this change, specifically how you're using that 1287 and 1678 rates for North Carolina for skill level 1 and 2 workers, and the $1.69 housing discount to determine the wage rates for that you are offering your own workers. Also, tell me a little bit about how workers maybe reacted to these changes and how you communicated these changes to your H-2A workers.
So I'll start with the second part first. Whenever the interim final rule was announced was in October of 2025. We were still harvesting apples then, so our H-2A employees were still here. So we were able to have multiple conversations before they left and just kind of talks, got a feel for how they were feeling about it, just tried to be very transparent about it, and that this was all new. It was new to them and it was new to us, and that just reassure them that we would be in communication as things progressed. The change in the methodology for determining the adverse effect wage rate was very welcomed by many farmers because it brought a level of predictability and, most importantly, changed to using accurate data. And that is what we had been advocating for a long time. Agriculture is already a business with so much uncertainty, like weather and pests and disease and market price fluctuations. So anything that we can be able to have a little bit more certainty on is really helpful when you're trying to make business decisions. With the new methodology, there are the two main skill levels that you referred to. Skill level 1 is for jobs that require less than 3 months of experience, and it doesn't require that they arrive to the job with any additional certifications. Level 2 is for jobs that do require more experience upon arrival, or for the employee to already have specific training. In North Carolina, the minimum wage for skill level 1 jobs is $12.78 an hour, and skill level 2 is $16.39. Those classifications aren't determined by us or anyone at the state level. Those classifications are determined by the Department of Labor based on the type of work that's being completed. And that is what you put in with your petition when you are first applying to be an H-2A employer. And there is also now the adjustment to compensate for the expense of the required housing that employers have to provide for H-2A employees. The housing compensation adjustment, I think it levels the playing field for non-H-2A employees that don't have housing provided, and they have to bear that expense themselves. So the current adverse compensation adjustment for North Carolina for housing is $1.69 per hour. Housing is one of the big expenses that can be prohibitive of a farm being able to use the H-2A program, depending on what their situation is. And so I think factoring that in, at least acknowledging that that is such a big expense and can sometimes be a prohibiting factor to being able to use the program. The change in wage methodology, it definitely is welcome and helps, but labor still remains one of the largest production expenses. Our workers are incredibly valuable members of our farm, and we want them to be compensated fairly. But we also have to ensure that our farm remains financially sustainable to continue on and hopefully for future generations. We are very lucky to have a high return rate. The same employees return season after season to work with us. Previously, the adverse effect wage rate felt like a ceiling rather than a minimum. So although it was the minimum, it really felt like the ceiling, and we did not have room to compensate long-term employees differently than new employees. Now we have that ability, and that adds fairness and I think shows our employees that they are valued. And it's important to remember, that wage rate is the minimum wage. We made the decision to pay our returning employees the same rate that they received last season. We are not decreasing pay this year. We could, but we aren't, because we were thankful that the wage didn't increase more than it was last year. And so we felt we were able to sustain that last year, and we could do the same this year. Whenever changes occur, though, communication is extremely important. Like I mentioned, we had those discussions before early on in October, and to be able to keep everyone in the loop of what's going on. And rate of pay is clear up front whenever using the H-2A program. So the employee knows exactly what they will be paid, and there aren't surprises and things that happen. So if it's not something that's going to work for them, then they can turn down that opportunity. At the end of the day, transparency builds trust, and that's why that is so important to me. We value our employees, and we appreciate the fact that many of them return year after year, and those long-term relationships are also important to our farm. I think we're hearing so much about food safety lately. Those long-term returning employees, they've had, they know the importance of that, and it's not necessarily something that we obviously educate them and everyone receives food safety training, but having someone that you have built that rapport with and you've seen their work and you know that they are careful and diligent is really important.
Yeah. There are a few things that I want to highlight of what you said. Very interesting. You told me is like the returning workers, because you have a high return rate, you maintain them at the same salary. So there was not a decrease in salary, but there was a conversation to maintain them where they were at. But then it
Correct.
gave you the opportunity of like those skill level 1 workers, the newer workers, being able to start at that lower rate because they are not returning workers, they don't have the same experience, right? So I wanted to highlight that point because, and then as you mentioned, communication, right? Upfront, even though they have the opportunity after they see the salary. They could say yes or no, I want to go to this farm or not. The fact that you have built a relationship and then with these workers, and the communication channels were very transparent, allow you to actually get these workers back at the same rate that you were having them the last year. Did I summarize that correctly,
Did,
Linda?
yes. And
Mhm.
I think it's important that even though we did not go to the new minimum,
Mhm.
I know just based on history, previous years, very recent history, each year the increase, it was a steady increase every year. And so it would have been very difficult for us to pay any more
Mhm.
because our market prices are very low.
Mhm.
But being able to maintain that, we did feel like would be sustainable for us. And what works for us may not work for someone else. And that's
Yeah.
why I do appreciate the fact that it's state by state now and not regional,
Mhm.
because everyone's different and you have to do what's going to work for you and your employees.
Yeah, and that's interesting because it's highlighted what when I found out that in Tennessee, we're anywhere from 1084 all the way to 2063 is actually all over the place. So you're right. I mean, each farm took the rule, adjusted to their own needs, and then just adopted the wage rate that was beneficial for them. So
Right. And I
it.
think that reflects more of a business model too. I mean, if
Hmm.
you look at other industries, other types of businesses, you don't have every worker making the same rate of pay.
That's right.
And farming is ultimately a business.
Yeah. Now let's this was very interesting, and I wanted to get the insights of what you guys are doing, and you explained it very well. And now I want to switch gears and talk about this Securing Agriculture's Workforce Act of 2026. Tell us what some of the major changes proposed are and why it was introduced.
So I was very fortunate through American Farm Bureau's Farm Labor Advisory Committee, I have been in some way part of this for a long time. And I'm very thankful for that because from that experience, I know how much work went into it and trying to get opinions from different people and from employees to the farmers to everybody that's in this. And so I appreciate how much time was spent to try to really come up with something that would work and that would be equitable to everybody. The Securing Agriculture's Workforce Act would expand H-2A access, help to keep costs more predictable, like we just talked about, and a very important component, I think, streamlining the process. And this would be the first permanent H-2A reform in 40 years. There's a lot to the bill, but a few really key components that I think are important and worth talking about: removing the term seasonal so that a contract could be a maximum of 350 days versus the 10 months previously. This would make the program available to animal agriculture like dairies and climate controlled agriculture. I know in our area of North Carolina, we are seeing an increase in indoor agriculture greenhouses, and that changes things. And that's a good reflection of something that's 40 years old. Legislation that's 40 years old really has to be updated because the way that we're farming is changing or has changed. It would also allow agricultural employees that are already in the U.S. to apply for H-2A visas. This is not a pathway for citizenship. It is a pathway to be in the U.S. legally. They would still have to undergo the entire H-2A application process, including things like background check, fingerprinting, all of the things that any H-2A employee is required to do. The Securing Agriculture's Workforce Act would also codify the interim final rule that was established in October of last year. Wages, housing adjustment, the staggered entry on the same contract. And what I see as a critical element, it would limit wage fluctuations year to year. And I'm sure as I'm saying that, people think, oh, yes, of course, that would help the farmer, but it helps the farm worker too, that employee. The proposal would be that it would not exceed 3.5% increase at any one time, or a 1.5% decrease. And so that way, the workers that are used to coming and want to come, they know that they wouldn't be decreased more than 1.5%. So it's thinking about both sides, and that would provide more certainty for farmers and farm workers, and ultimately the consumers that are buying the food that we're growing. It would also allow for multi-year labor certifications and housing inspections that would reduce cost and make the employees' experience simpler to navigate. Another very important piece, I think, is the streamlining of the process. An online platform where all of the interactions with employers, the workers, the agencies that are involved, this would be huge for farm workers and farmers. Currently, communication between agencies is difficult, and often it leaves farm workers in limbo, especially when they're just when they get to the point of entry. They are often left in limbo at that time, and then leaves farmers waiting for the employees to arrive. That is a stressful time for everyone, but the employees are really always on my mind at that time because that's stressful for them. If they arrive to their appointment and there is a simple error that they had no idea about, they can be sent back home, which is usually a long trip, and then have to wait on a new appointment. So anything that we can do to make that process simpler would take a lot of that stress away. The legislation, I feel like it was written with everyone in mind: farm workers, farmers, and then the public that depend on having a safe, affordable, and abundant food supply. Ultimately, I just think that it's important to understand that this proposal is about creating a workforce that is legal, is stable, and is predictable. Farmers need employees. The farm workers want these opportunities to come and work, and consumers depend on the food that we grow. And this is only proposed legislation, like you mentioned earlier. It has not become law. The language could definitely be changed as it makes its way through the process, and it could be delayed. It could possibly not pass at all. But I do believe that it represents true compromise and an important conversation about updating agricultural labor policies to be a better reflection of today's farming realities. I know that this can be a controversial topic, and any legislation comes with many opinions. But in order for this legislation to pass, it will mean looking at it from all aspects and require compromise. But I think that we owe it to farmers and farm workers and everyone that depends on what we grow to put in the time and effort needed to be able to work through it.
This is excellent, Linda. It's a very well detailed explanation of what is proposed. Definitely, I was reading an article the other day about how a study increasing the use of the H-2A program. And definitely, this proposal probably will just make it more accessible to different sectors of agriculture as it become easier to access this very much needed labor force. Linda, I cannot thank you enough, as always, for your time and being candid about everything that is going on at your farm and at the federal level with all these legislations. Thank you,
Thank
Linda.
you. Thank you so much.